Good afternoon, and welcome to Our Voices, Our Stories, where we are documenting the gay history of men living in Western North Carolina. Thank you for being with us. I'm here today with my friend Justin, and Justin, thank you for sharing your time with us.
Absolutely, Butch. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of
Yeah.
course. I know that when we've talked, you
hmm
you were born in Pennsylvania, if I'm correct,
Yes.
but then your parents up and moved to outside of Asheville, not necessarily the city. When
hmm
was that?
So yeah, we moved from Asheville or from North Pennsylvania to Asheville when I was around 9 years old, and then basically grew up here. So a lot of times when people ask, where did you grow up? I'll say, well, I'm originally from Pennsylvania, but I really grew up in Asheville.
Well, you really
hmm
did during your formative years.
Absolutely.
So, what was
Yeah.
it like as a child growing up? Now, it wasn't actually
hmm
Asheville. Was it in Asheville
It
or
was in
Madison?
Asheville.
Oh,
Yep. I
okay.
actually grew up in South Asheville. And I went to school at Estes Elementary, Valley Springs, and then to TC Robertson High School.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. You're a real local
Real
then.
local. Yep. Right in the
Good.
midst. Yeah.
So, what was it like for you when you got here to Asheville and you started getting into your formative years?
Absolutely. So, yeah, when I first moved here, I was in third grade. So it was like the half of the year of third grade that I got into. And elementary school was all fine and dandy. Middle school, once middle school came around, I think that's when, I went through puberty a little bit early. So that's when, all the hormones, the body changing,
Mm-hmm.
everything like that. And I think that's really when I also started to kind of figure out that, I'm not really liking the same things as other people. You know what I mean? um, and didn't necessarily know the name for it,
Right.
but I knew that I had an attraction for guys rather than I did, for girls that were in my grade.
Right.
And, from middle school, you have all these awkward years, especially from sixth grade to eighth grade in middle school. And you're just trying to figure yourself out, and you're trying to just navigate the best way that you can and really just make it through the day. And I think once I got into high school is when I really started to understand that, wow, my attraction is for men. And that really kind of kicked off for me when I was a freshman in high school. And the previous year in eighth grade and last year in middle school, I was on the wrestling team.
Uh-huh.
And so it was fine. It was, whatever. I've never been super competitive. So I've never felt super like invested, but I was like, my friends are here, I'm going to do it.
Right.
But I remember vividly one of the first, I think it was the first wrestling practice that I had in high school. There was like this banging at the door. It was in this auxiliary gym. It was this big kind of like secondary gym that we had the wrestling practices at. And so we're just going through the motions, going through the moves and whatnot. And then you hear this bang at the door on the other side of the room. And then someone goes and opens the door, and in comes these two people in these Letterman jackets who were a part of the wrestling team, but they still had football going on. So they weren't,
Okay.
in it. And immediately I was smitten. I
Were
was
you
just,
all on a letter jacket?
yeah. And it was like, it's to this day, I just remembered almost being like kind of frozen and just like pinpointing on these guys that walked in. And I was like, oh, wow, they're pretty, And so that's really when, at least through my formative years, how I kind of learned that, I have an interest in men, and to kind of go into that, if you'd like me to,
Yeah.
is like, so for the 4 years that I was on the wrestling team, one of the people that was, one of the guys that came in the Letterman jacket after he graduated, because he was a senior at that time, he stayed on for 3 more years of doing like assistant coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the biggest crush on him the entire time, and it was of course, it was these unrequited feelings.
Yes.
And looking back on it, I think it was more infatuation than actual,
Puppy love.
puppy love, being in love with someone, But it was such a monumental experience in kind of shaping my own sexuality and who I was as a person. And looking back on that, you kind of have to smile and grin and laugh at it a little bit because of just the kind of feelings, and you think the world is going to end and all these sort of moments that like, why don't they see me, And
I hear that a lot. Why
Yeah.
don't they see me?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just, wasn't in the cards, wasn't meant to be.
With him necessarily.
No, with him. Absolutely. Yeah.
So how was it in high school? I mean, did you face any did you come out to anybody in high
No.
school?
So that's the thing. Like, I did not come out in high school. And so even throughout my years on the wrestling team, I wouldn't say that I was putting on a front, so to speak. I wasn't like going around, saying jokes or, acting a certain way, trying to be like this very like macho jock kind of person. But, I just there were moments, especially that I was just very private into myself. And I think that's kind of what it was, more in my head than anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people would say that's called security.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have to put it out there too much, then you're not going to get made fun of, or you're not going to get beat up, or whatever it was for kids that went through that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So when did you actually start to come out, as we say?
Yes. So I actually came out officially when I was in my freshman year, the spring semester of college. And so my first, the fall term, I moved into this dorm, and I had a hard time the first couple weeks, let's say a month or so, of getting acclimated to college. I felt like things weren't just syncing up in my mind that I thought that it would be. I wasn't out with a large group of friends, or I wasn't partying all the time. There was these expectations that I think I put on myself to really have this, college experience. And because it wasn't being met, I was really kind of devastated. But I did meet some people on the hall that I was at, the floor that I was on in my dorm room. And they were really nice, all very quirky in their own way. But that's the best part. I think your own quirkiness matches other people's quirkiness.
Indeed.
And you just mesh well. And tying into my coming out, that really kind of goes in hand with one of the people that I met on the floor. And I remember being in my dorm room and was probably just, feeling a little bit sulky or whatever the case might be, And I remember hearing this bang on the door. And I opened the door, and there standing here is 6 foot tall, really slender African-American man. And he and their name was Rain. Well, at the time they went by a different name, but they go by Rain now. And they just introduced themselves, and it was almost like an instant connection. I felt there was this magnetism. How there's some people out there that are almost just like magnets.
Yes.
They pull you in, and Rain was one of them. And so after getting to know Rain a little bit, we would all kind of get together. We'd go to the cafeteria and eat. We just became friends, natural friends.
Right.
And I would say in that time, especially that first semester, hanging out with Rain, there was not only that magnetism, but there was just this authenticity that they were completely themselves. It was so beautiful. It to this day, I am just so blown away by it, even at such a young age.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because at that point, Rain was probably around 18. I was 18, 19 as well. And so kind of having that self-assurance and knowing who you are, and kind of being well, if you don't like me, don't like me,
Right.
That it's just mind blowing, you know?
Confidence.
Yeah, the confidence, the security within yourself, you know? And so there were moments when we would be going out or like going to lunch or whatever kind of hangout session. It really started to bring me out of my shell. I started dressing differently. I remember, it's so funny. I remember the first month that I was in college, I was like, well, everybody's wearing these certain clothes. And they had them at this like shop downtown that was like a college shop or whatever. And it had all these like fish and shit on them. And it's like, never fished, don't care about fishing. But I was like, that seems to be like the thing. You got to wear this outfit. So I remember, I think I spent close to like $100, $200 on these stupid fish shirts. And I wore them throughout that first semester. But then as, you know, I started feeling more comfortable and with myself and like, you know, asking Rain, like, where did you go shopping? You know, what do you recommend? He recommended like Urban Outfitters at the time. And, you know, I would go there and get a little bit more flashier stuff or stuff that just had a bit more color. And it's almost like you can see that transition from the first semester of like these muted fish colors into like this vibrant rainbow. And I think that's what a great, you know, what a great kind of like transition that is to going from this almost like hidden performative person to someone who you're actually becoming.
You're actually coming out.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean coming out as gay. It just means coming out of your shell as a person.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful. That's great that you met him and
Yeah.
had that experience. Do you still have contact with him?
You know, I've messaged him once or twice when I was still living abroad in China, and we briefly talked. They are in Berlin from the last I spoke to them, because they're a dancer. They went to school for dancing, and so they were in Berlin, and I think they're still there. And when I reached out to them, one of the conversations I just reached out, didn't even necessarily was like a back and forth conversation. One of the messages I reached out was just thanking them, you know, just letting them know how their friendship meant.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. More people need to do those kinds of things.
I think so.
Let people know that you appreciate them.
Yes, I think you really do. I mean, it's just one of those things where even if you're having a bad day, you know that you've made a difference.
Yeah. So you mentioned China.
Yeah.
And I know just from knowing you that you spent some time in China. How did you end up going there, and why did you end up going there?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So after I finished college, so that would have been 2016, I was just looking for a job at the time. And one of the jobs that I applied for was up in Chicago, and I was going to go live with two of these girls, and didn't get the job and didn't work out. So it was fine. You know what I mean? A little bit disappointing. But then an opportunity came up for what was originally Disney English, and it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
But I had a background with Disney. I worked for the Disney College program 1 full year down in Orlando, and then another half a year at a separate time in Anaheim in California. And so having that Disney background and going through the interview and going through like teaching, like a demo teaching, you know, I was able to get the job.
Okay. Let's just pause for a moment.
Sure.
Were you a character?
I was.
What character were you?
Yeah, so I was all the smaller characters. So
All of them.
So
that's a lot of changing outfits.
it is. So I was Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck, Pinocchio. I was Peter Pan at one point. You know, it's the funny thing is like actually Disney has a term that you want to use. You don't say that you are a character. You're friends with them.
Okay.
It's keeping that
Good to know.
magic, keeping that kind of authenticity alive and well, you know? So I would say, you know, I'm friends with Mickey today, or I'm friends with Minnie today. And I had amazing opportunities, you know, with some of the characters like Peter Pan or Pinocchio or Minnie Mouse. I got to be in parades as well. And, you know, being in a parade in a costume in the middle of Florida and even in the evening heat is just taxing.
I can only
Yeah.
imagine.
But it was such an amazing opportunity. And it opened a lot of doors for me.
It's interesting how your friend helped you to kind of come out and
Mhm.
find your personality, and then you end up being personalities.
Right.
And
Yeah.
how wonderful that is that you got to experience that. I
Yeah.
don't think I've met anybody that was a Disney character before in my life, so I'm
Yeah.
touched.
Yeah. And it's a great point that you make about the kind of personalities or kind of like bringing out those like pieces of you in
Yeah.
these characters. One of the things with, like being Mickey Mouse, you bring out this kind of, you do what's right, this integrity. With Minnie Mouse, I brought a lot of this like femininity that I really like was happy to bring out. And with Donald Duck, it was just, he could be an asshole and get away with it. And people ate it up.
He was always my favorite.
He was my favorite too.
So the Disney
Mhm.
prepared you for what you were going to do and go to China.
Yeah.
So let's get back to
Sure.
how you ended up in China.
Yeah. So I applied for this Disney English position. It was just going to be a foreign trainer. So that would essentially be like a ESL teacher over in Shanghai. And they had these training centers all over China at the time. And when I completed the interview, they asked if I had a preference of a city that I'd like to be in. And I said Shanghai because Shanghai was their biggest metropolitan. It's like the equivalent. I always compare it to after living there, like it's like living in New York. It is diverse. It has a lot of international, like transient people. People come and they go. People are bringing new businesses. There's a huge art market there, a huge fashion capital. So it's very easy to kind of dive into that area as to opposed to being out in like the rural parts of China,
Right.
Right. And so got the role and they were able to send me out to China. It took several months. You have to send all your documentation to what do you call it? Where you send some sort of place that you get all your passport information notarized and whatnot.
Gotcha.
And so after that, it was a huge, long process for that. But then I was able to get on a plane and go to China. It was wonderful.
So a young gay man arriving in China,
Mm-hmm.
what were your thoughts initially?
I guess my expectation was going into it. What was really funny is my first expectation going into that was everybody was going to be the same height as me. You know what I mean? And that was not the case. Everybody was still like 6 feet tall. You know what I mean? But it was a great opportunity. I didn't really know what that kind of environment was going to look like, and I can kind of touch on that, Shanghai and China in itself really is advanced technologically speaking. But when it comes to social issues, I mean, they're still probably back in the 90s, maybe even the 80s. It's a slower growth. So when I moved to Shanghai, I really didn't know what to expect. But there were gay bars, gay clubs, they had gay events as well. But I was there for 6.5 years. You could see the transition of having all these vibrant spaces to eventually kind of being pushed down and away. Mm-hmm. They used to have a pride event, like a kind of like citywide pride event in Shanghai, but that was kind of squashed very quickly. I think it maybe lasted several years, and then government came in and said, we're not going to do this anymore. Mm-hmm.
We're going to hide those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting too, if I recall, you were in China during COVID.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what that experience must have been like,
Sure.
because you were really locked down.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had 2 instances of really big lockdowns. Now, the first one was the kind of one before it spread out to all the other countries.
Right.
So that would have been around March, end of February, March of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually was on vacation in Australia at the time. And so our school messaged us and was like, there's this virus going around. We're not really sure. Things are popping up. So if you want to stay where you are, you can, or you have to come back. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go back. I just figured it'd be something that's quickly taken care of and eradicated.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the case, unfortunately. And there were a few of my coworkers that we were a part of this school that stayed in the country that they were currently vacationing in. And once, I think a week later, China officially put a lock on the border. And so though the coworkers that were out, they were waiting around in these countries for like maybe 1 or 2 months. And then they decided that we're not going to get back in. I mean, China kept a zero COVID policy, particularly with their borders and their cities as well, for about 3 years, 3.5 years.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
that first lockdown when I was back there was probably a couple weeks. And that was just, staying at home, regular testing. You couldn't go out or anything like that. But then it eased up and opened up fairly quickly. But the second lockdown that we had, which was in 2022, that was a lot more strict. And I think that's what a lot of people saw on social media, the way that people were getting it out on social media. Because, if you don't know, China is under they call it the Great Firewall. And so it's basically a service system with, you can't get internet access unless you have a VPN.
Right.
And then you're able to, kind of bypass that. And so particularly with the second lockdown, I mean, that went on for, I think it was like 4 months. And at that time, me and some of my coworkers were fairly lucky. We lived in compounds that they would still let you kind of walk around the compound, but you wouldn't be able to go past the security gate.
Okay.
Now, there were some people that were in apartments that were being welded shut. There are some people in compounds where they ended up putting up fencing, and that had, not necessarily barbs on the top, but they had some sort of way that you couldn't get over it. I mean, it was very draconian in a sense,
Wow.
of keeping this lockdown. And it got to the point where people in China started to get fed up with it all. And a lot of the locals even took to the streets. And you don't do that in China,
I can imagine.
And so once that started getting traction, and it also was leaking out to other countries as well, the government said, fine, we're lifting the zero COVID policy immediately. And everybody, at least in Shanghai, and I'm sure in other cities as well, that December, because it was around December when they lifted it, we all got COVID. They just basically did one big mass, herd.
Right.
Yeah.
Herd immunity.
Herd immunity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So you had COVID.
I did. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you got through it, obviously.
Yeah.
And that's a good
Thankfully.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. How did that change your whole social life? I mean, because you're
Yeah.
young
Mhm.
and you want to be going out and doing things
Yeah.
as young people do.
Yeah.
What did you find yourself doing?
Yeah. So at both of the times that I was there, so the first lockdown, I ended up getting a dog, and at that really helped the second lockdown as well, because I wasn't being confined just to myself in this apartment.
Yeah.
But, I'd reach out to friends, we'd FaceTime, or we would just talk on the phone, I'd talk with family, hang out with the dog. And, I'm a little bit naturally of a homebody as well at times.
Mhm.
So I think that kind of helped. But there was this cabin fever, there was this angst to want to get out. And I think a lot of people felt that. And overall, I think it really reshaped our social structure.
Oh.
I think not only in China, but across the globe. I think it's one of these instances that, you don't tend to see as many people as you used to out and about.
Yes.
You
Yes.
don't, you go to bars or you go to clubs or other, even stores and whatnot, and there seems to be this lingering after effect,
Yeah. So did you have gay friends that you were able to talk to and hang
Yes.
out with? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine that would be a really social nightmare
Yeah.
if you didn't have
Yeah.
that community
Yeah.
that you live in for yourself.
Yeah.
Good.
So my friend, best friend still to this day, he lives in the UK with his husband, and his name is Daniel. And so I met him through the school that I went to work at right after Disney English. Now Disney English closed down, so that doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
And so after Disney English closed down, I went to this like international kindergarten, and that's where I met Daniel. And it was similar to Rain, where it was like this magnetism, and it was just this kind of it's like you've knew them forever, and you just finally like you're home again,
Right.
So yeah, me and Daniel were really close the entire time that he was there, and he left in he left like the latter of 2022. He left maybe around December, and so I stayed in Shanghai for at least another year. I left in February of 2024, and during that time we would always hang out. We were always talking, and even to this day, we live on different countries, but and we may not talk as frequently, but when we do, it's just picking up where you left off, and it just feels so good. And that's how it's like a really authentic relationship.
Exactly. I love having those friendships that I may not see you for a couple of years, but when I do, we're right back where we were in that friendship.
Yeah.
Let's take a short break right here. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how it was to come back to the States after living in China and coming out again, really, in America. We'll be right back. More with Justin.